that huge cutout by now. It's for the selfie camera and a depth sensor and infrared. This is about as small as you can get, actually, a pill-shaped cutout if you want to still have all three of those things. But I think we're finding more and more that the extra depth sensors are not necessarily as useful as we've thought they are. But the infrared in the middle is nice to have for face unlock in low light environments. When I see this, I think of the iPhone and its massive notch, because of course they have all those Face ID sensors. And I'm hoping maybe finally this year we see a much smaller notch in the new iPhone. They seem pretty committed to Face ID and keeping the infrared and all that stuff at the top, but if we're seeing that Huawei can do this pill-shaped cutout being much smaller than a notch, then hopefully Apple can shrink the notch this year too. Then underneath this display is the new optical fingerprint reader, which they say is 30% larger and 30% faster. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, thank you, sweet. On paper, those improvements are great. I've been saying we should get these fingerprint readers like the whole bottom half of the screen, so it's just easy. You don't even have to think about it. But in practice, actually using this one, I can't even really tell if it's actually bigger. In fact, the animation, which you can see where it lights up, is about the same size as last year. And it's fast, which is great, but really getting that sensor larger is the technical challenge here. Plus, I think this one's actually a little higher up on the phone than I would have wanted. But I will still say, I hope other manufacturers copy continuing to work on fitting bigger sensors in these screens. So then really probably the biggest focus of this new phone is the camera system on the back. What? I know, it's so subtle. Did you even notice it back there? The P40 Pro has a quad camera system. So 50 megapixel main camera with OIS with an absolutely massive 1/1.2 inch sensor, then a 40 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 12 megapixel 5x optical periscope camera you can see over there on the side with that recognizable rectangle, all on the back with the time of flight sensor and a mic and the flash as well. Interestingly, if the Galaxy S20 Ultra didn't exist, I think it would be easy to look at this camera and the numbers and think, oh wow, it looks like Huawei is just playing the numbers game with their camera. They're trying to throw as many of the biggest numbers as possible at us to hopefully equal a good camera. But Huawei's angle is actually almost the exact opposite of that. They said, basically, we don't think we need to go all out with the numbers. We're not hitting 100 here, but we do want to strike a balance between high numbers and actually good performance. Okay. Please copy that. But of course, you can only copy the approach of the camera as far as getting to actual execution. Now this camera, as far as it translates, it's still early. I've only had this phone for 2 days for my first impressions, but it seems pretty good, usually really good. I've taken a lot of good photos, a lot of sharp photos with this camera. It is binning and spitting out 12 megapixel photos by default. And for the most part, both the standard and the ultra wide are giving me pretty consistent photos, although the ultra wide is still a little bit softer despite its 40 megapixels. But you're also gonna notice from the main camera that huge sensor has some of the same problems as the huge sensor from the S20 Ultra, basically with the plane of focus being so thin that close-up subjects aren't completely in focus and you do start to get some fringing. No autofocus problems though. That Phasitech autofocus in this phone seems rock solid despite the problems the S20 Ultra had. But yeah, overall here, if you look past the numbers, this is a solid camera that reminds me of many Huawei cameras in the past as far as color and high exposure and just the general shot style. Matter of fact, if any of the cameras here impressed me, it was actually the selfie camera with all the beauty modes turned off because it kept a ton of detail. That to me is a really good first impression. The battery in this phone is 4,200 milliamp hours. And if anything, it feels like a bigger battery trend is sort of a wave everyone's hopping on now. Everyone copying that is a good thing. But this one takes it a step further. P40 Pro has 40-watt wired charging and, incredibly, support for 40-watt fast wireless charging, which is awesome. For context, the $1,000 iPhone 11 Pro Max ships with an 18-watt wired fast charger. I don't even know if I have access to a wireless charger that cranks out 40 watts of power, but the second I can, I will try to get my hands on it. But until then, other manufacturers, yes, please copy that. And then the rest of the specs of this phone are pretty high end, if you're wondering. Not bleeding edge, but the Kirin 990, 8 gigs of RAM, 128 or 256 gigs of storage, IP68 water resistant, 5G enabled, and there are a bunch of other little